Natalia Bennett stood frozen before the enormous mirror in the bridal preparation room. Her wedding dress sparkled with thousands of tiny crystals, each one representing a dollar her father owed to powerful people. The dress cost more than her family home, yet it felt like wearing chains made of silk and diamonds. She touched the delicate lace sleeves and wondered how something so beautiful could make her feel so trapped. Outside the room, she could hear guests arriving. Expensive cars pulled up to the Hartwell estate, bringing wealthy strangers who came to witness a transaction disguised as a wedding. Natalia closed her eyes and remembered the conversation that changed everything. Just 2 months ago, her father had sat across from her at their small kitchen table, his hand shaking as he explained the situation. His company faced bankruptcy. Creditors were threatening legal action. The family would lose everything. Then he mentioned Julian Hartwell's proposal. The powerful CEO needed a wife to soften his harsh public image. In exchange, he would save the Bennett family from financial ruin. Her father had looked at her with such desperate hope that Natalia felt her heart breaking. She thought about her younger brother's university education, her mother's medical treatments, and the modest house where she grew up. How could she say no when saying yes would protect everyone she loved? Walking toward her fate, the ceremony took place in the grand ballroom of the Hartwell mansion. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky. White orchids covered every surface, filling the air with their heavy perfume. 400 guests filled the rows of gold chairs, most of them business associates and society figures that Natalia had never met. She recognized perhaps 10 people in the entire crowd. Her father walked beside her down the long aisle, his arm trembling beneath her hand. Natalia kept her eyes forward, focusing on the man waiting at the altar. Julian Hartwell stood tall and imposing, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his athletic frame. At 39, he remained handsome with sharp features and intense brown eyes. But those eyes held no warmth as they watched her approach. They looked at her the way someone might examine a car before purchase, checking for flaws and calculating value. When they reached the altar, her father kissed her cheek and whispered an apology she barely heard over the pounding of her heart. Julian took her hand, his grip firm and possessive. The minister began speaking words about love and commitment that felt like cruel jokes. Natalia heard herself repeat the vows, felt Julian slide a massive diamond ring onto her finger. And when the minister announced them married, Julian leaned down for the required kiss. His lips touched hers for exactly 3 seconds. The kiss held no passion, no tenderness, nothing but cold obligation. It was a kiss performed for the cameras and the watching crowd. When he pulled away, Julian's expression remained unchanged, as if kissing his new wife meant nothing more than signing another business contract. The reception of lies, the celebration that followed, felt like torture. Natalia sat at the head table beside her new husband, smiling until her face ached, while Julian spent the entire evening discussing business deals with his associates. He never once spoke to her directly. When guests approached to offer congratulations, Julian would place his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt like claiming ownership of property. Victoria Hartwell. Julian's mother sat on his other side like a queen surveying her kingdom. She was a thin woman with silver hair pulled back severely from her face, wearing diamonds that probably cost more than most houses. Her cold blue eyes watched Natalia constantly, missing nothing. During a brief moment when Julian stepped away to take a phone call, Victoria leaned close to Natalia. "You should feel grateful, girl," Victoria said softly, her voice like ice wrapped in velvet. "My son could have married anyone. Instead, he chose to rescue your pathetic family from their own failures. I expect you to remember that every single day. You will smile. You will be charming. You will never embarrass this family with inappropriate behavior. Your job is simple. Look beautiful, keep silent, and do exactly as you are told." Natalia wanted to defend herself and her family, but the words stuck in her throat. She managed only a small nod. Victoria smiled, satisfied, and patted Natalia's hand as if rewarding a pet for good behavior. The cruelest night as midnight approached, guests finally began leaving. Natalia's parents came to say goodbye, her mother crying softly as she hugged her daughter. Her father could barely meet her eyes, guilt written across every line of his face. Natalia held them both, wanting to tell them she would be fine, but the lie would not come. She simply kissed them and watched them walk away. Feeling like she was watching her old life disappear forever, Julian led her upstairs to the master suite without speaking. The room was enormous, decorated in dark colors with furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. A massive bed dominated the space, and Natalia stood near the doorway, uncertain and afraid. While Julian poured himself whiskey from a crystal decanter, "Remove that dress," he said without looking at her. "It costs $40,000 and needs proper storage. There is a robe in the bathroom." Natalia's hands shook as she struggled with the zipper. Julian crossed the room with obvious irritation and roughly pulled it down. The dress fell to the floor in a pool of silk and crystals. Standing in only her undergarments, Natalia felt more exposed than she ever had in her life. She grabbed the dress and fled to the bathroom, hanging it carefully before putting on the silk robe with trembling fingers. When she returned, Julian sat by the window, still holding his whiskey. He looked at her with an expression somewhere between contempt and boredom. "I suppose you expect me to consummate this marriage," he said, his tone mocking. "Perhaps you imagine some romantic scene from the movies you probably watch." He stood and walked toward her. For one moment, Natalia thought he might actually show some kindness. But Julian stopped just inches away, looking down at her with cold eyes. "Let me be perfectly clear, Natalia. This marriage is a business arrangement. You saved your family from bankruptcy. I acquired a respectable wife to improve my public image. That is all this is. I do not want you. I do not desire you. I will never touch you." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of expensive alcohol. "We'll have your own room down the hall. You will attend events when required and play the devoted wife. But privately, you are nothing to me. You are a beautiful decoration, Natalia. And decorations are meant to be displayed, not touched." His words felt like physical blows. Tears filled Natalia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall, refused to give him that satisfaction. Julian saw her struggle and smiled coldly. "Your room is 4 doors down. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Do not disturb me." Natalia walked past him on shaking legs, finding the room he indicated. It was beautiful, but felt like a prison cell. She closed the door and finally let the tears come, sliding down to sit on the floor, crying silently in her expensive robe. This was her wedding night, and instead of love, she had received only rejection and humiliation. 3 months passed like 3 years in the Hartwell mansion. Natalia woke each morning in her beautiful prison, went through the motions of being Mrs. Julian Hartwell, and went to sleep each night feeling more invisible than the day before. The mansion had 23 rooms, but Natalia felt trapped in every single one of them. Victoria Hartwell had become her constant shadow, teaching her how to be a proper society wife with lessons that felt more like military training. Every Tuesday, Natalia attended charity, luncheons with other wealthy wives who spoke about helping the poor while wearing jewelry worth more than most annual salaries. Every Thursday, she sat through etiquette classes where Victoria corrected her posture, her speech, and her smile. Every weekend, she stood beside Julian at business dinners and fundraising galas, playing the role of the devoted wife while he ignored her existence, except when photographs were being taken, Julian himself remained a stranger. He left for his office before dawn and returned late at night, often smelling of expensive perfume that was not hers. He never asked about her day, never shared details about his own life, never showed any interest in getting to know the woman he had married. On the rare occasions when they were alone together, he treated her with polite indifference. As if she were a house guest, he had no interest in entertaining. The mansion staff pitied her. Natalia could see it in their eyes when they served her breakfast in the enormous dining room where she ate alone. The housekeeper, an older woman named Grace, sometimes lingered to ask if Natalia needed anything, her voice gentle with unspoken sympathy. But even Grace kept her distance, too afraid of Victoria's wrath to offer a real friendship. A spark of hope, everything changed on a warm evening in late spring. Victoria had insisted Natalia attended charity gala, supporting a new community arts center. Julian was traveling for business, so Victoria accompanied her instead, watching her every move like a hawk watching prey. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and expensive gowns. Natalia stood near a fountain of champagne, feeling utterly alone in a room full of people. When someone spoke beside her, you'd look like you would rather be anywhere else right now. Natalia turned to find a man smiling at her with genuine warmth. He was perhaps 35, with kind hazel eyes and dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead in a way that suggested he did not spend hours styling it. He wore a simple but well-fitted suit, and something about his open, friendly expression made Natalia's carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "Is it that obvious?" she asked, surprised at the honesty in her own voice. "Only to someone who feels the same way," he replied, extending his hand. "Thomas Green. I teach art history at the university. I only come to these events because they guilt me into it by actually doing good work for the community." Natalia shook his hand, feeling the warmth of genuine human contact for the first time in months. Natalia Hartwell. Thomas's expression shifted slightly when he heard her last name, a flash of recognition crossing his face. Everyone knew the Hartwell name. Everyone knew about the powerful CEO and his recent marriage. But Thomas recovered quickly, his smile returning. So what does Natalia Hartwell do when she is not attending charity galas? The question surprised her. Nobody had asked her about herself in months. She was always introduced as Julian's wife, as if she had no identity beyond that title. She hesitated, then decided to answer honestly. "I used to paint," she said softly. "Before I got married, I spent every free moment in my tiny studio apartment, covered in paint, creating things that probably were not very good, but made me happy." "Used to?" Thomas asked, his eyes showing real interest. "What happened?" Natalia glanced across the room where Victoria stood talking to a group of society women, her sharp eyes occasionally flicking toward Natalia to ensure she was behaving appropriately. "Life changed," Natalia said simply. "I do not have time for painting anymore." Thomas followed her gaze and seemed to understand something without her having to explain. His expression softened with compassion that made Natalia's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "That is a shame," he said gently. "The world always needs more artists. Beauty and creativity are not luxuries, Natalia. They are necessities for the soul." Seeds of friendship. Over the next hour, Natalia and Thomas talked about art. About the pieces displayed throughout the ballroom, about his work at the university. He spoke with such passion about helping students discover their creative voices that Natalia felt something inside her begin to wake up, something she thought had died on her wedding night. For the first time in months, she laughed. Really laughed, not the practiced society laugh Victoria had taught her, but genuine amusement that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside. Victoria appeared beside them suddenly, her presence like a cold wind. Her sharp eyes assessed Thomas, cataloging every detail about him and clearly finding him lacking in importance. "Natalia, dear," Victoria said, her voice sweet but her eyes hard. "We should be going. You have an early appointment tomorrow with the hairstylist?" "Of course," Natalia said, feeling the walls closing in again. She turned to Thomas. "It was lovely talking with you." "The pleasure was entirely mine," Thomas said, then did something unexpected. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. "I run a free community art class every Saturday afternoon at the center. Anyone is welcome. If you ever want to pick up a brush again, we would love to have you." Natalia took the card, feeling Victoria's disapproval radiating beside her like heat from a fire. "Thank you." As Victoria steered her toward the exit, Natalia clutched the card in her hand like a lifeline. That night, alone in her room, she studied it. The card was simple, just his name and the address of the art center. But it represented something she had thought lost forever. It represented possibility. The risk of hope. The following Saturday, Natalia told Victoria she was going shopping. Instead, she had the driver take her to the community arts center. It was a modest building in a working-class neighborhood. It's nothing like the gleaming towers and mansions she had become accustomed to. But when she walked inside and smelled the familiar scent of paint and turpentine, something in her chest loosened for the first time in months. Thomas looked surprised and genuinely pleased to see her. The class was small, perhaps a dozen people of various ages, all gathered around easels in a bright, cheerful room. Nobody cared that she was Mrs. Julian Hartwell. Nobody treated her like fragile crystal or a business asset. They simply welcomed her as another person who loved creating art. Natalia picked up a brush. The moment it touched the canvas, she felt tears streaming down her face. She was crying and painting simultaneously, releasing months of trapped emotion onto the white surface. Thomas quietly placed a box of tissues beside her easel and left her alone to work through whatever she needed to work through. She painted a bird in a golden cage. Its wings spread as if trying to fly through the bars. The symbolism was obvious even to her, but she did not care. For 3 hours, she lost herself in color and texture and the pure joy of creation. When the class ended, she looked at her painting and saw herself staring back. "It is beautiful," Thomas said softly, standing beside her, raw and honest. "That is what makes good art." "I need to come back," Natalia said, surprised by the desperation in her own voice. "Please, can I come back next week?" "You can come back every week if you want," Thomas replied. "Art is for everyone, Natalia. It does not belong only to people with time and money. It belongs to anyone who needs it." The shadows gather for the next month. Natalia attended class every Saturday. She told Victoria she was visiting her family, a lie that came surprisingly easily. Each week, she felt a little more like herself. She talked with Thomas about art and life, carefully avoiding details about her marriage, but finding comfort in his easy friendship. He never pushed for information she was not ready to share. He simply accepted her as she was, but secrets have a way of coming to light. One Saturday, as Natalia was leaving the art center, she found Julian's black car parked across the street. Her blood turned to ice. Julian stood beside it, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had been traveling for business and was not supposed to return until Monday. But there he was, and there was no innocent explanation for why his wife was in this neighborhood instead of shopping in the expensive boutiques. Victoria had approved. Natalia walked toward him slowly, her heart pounding. Julian opened the car door without speaking, and she got in. The drive home was silent, tension filling the air like electricity before a storm. When they arrived at the mansion, Julian finally spoke. "My office. Now." Natalia followed him to his private study, a room she had never been allowed to enter before. Julian closed the door and turned to face her, his brown eyes blazing with something she had never seen before. Not love or concern, but something darker. Possession, control, anger that someone had dared to touch what belonged to him. "Was he?" Julian demanded. "Friend," Natalia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just a friend who teaches art." Julian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I am stupid? You think I do not know what happens when bored wives start taking secret classes with sympathetic teachers?" "Nothing is happening," Natalia insisted. "I just wanted to paint again. That is all." "You wanted to embarrass me," Julian corrected coldly. "You wanted to sneak around behind my back and make me look like a fool. Well, let me make something very clear, Natalia. You belong to me. Your time belongs to me. Your actions reflect on me, and I will not tolerate you making me look weak." "I am not your property," Natalia said, finding courage she did not know she possessed. "I am a person." Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are my wife. That means you do what I say when I say it. No more art classes. No more sneaking around. You will stay here, where you belong, and you will remember why you married me in the first place. To save your pathetic family. Or has 3 months of luxury made you forget about them?" The threat was clear. If she disobeyed, her family would suffer. Julian would take back everything he had given them. Natalia felt the cage closing around her again, tighter than before. But this time, something was different. This time, she had tasted freedom, and she knew with absolute certainty that she could not go back to being the silent, decorative wife Julian demanded. "I understand," she said quietly, but it was a lie. She understood nothing except that her marriage was not just loveless. It was a prison. And somehow, some way, she was going to find a way out. The weeks following Julian's discovery became the darkest period of Natalia's life. He had not laid a hand on her, but his control became suffocating in ways that left no visible bruises. Victoria moved into one of the guest suites, claiming she wanted to spend more time with her son, but Natalia knew the truth. She was there to watch, to ensure Natalia never stepped out of line again. Every morning, Victoria reviewed Natalia's schedule. Every afternoon, she accompanied her to approved activities. Every evening, she sat at dinner with them, her cold eyes missing nothing. Natalia felt like a child being punished, except children eventually earned back their freedom. She saw no end to her sentence. Julian became even more distant, if that was possible. But now his absence felt different. Before, he had simply ignored her. Now, he avoided her with purpose, as if her very presence disgusted him. When they did attend events together, his hand on her arm felt like iron shackles. His smile for the cameras looked more like a warning. Natalia stopped eating properly. Food tasted like dust in her mouth. She lost weight, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. Grace, the housekeeper, looked at her with increasing concern, sometimes leaving extra portions of comfort food outside her bedroom door. But Natalia could barely force down more than a few bites before nausea overwhelmed her. One night, alone in her room, Natalia pulled out Thomas's business card, which she had hidden between the pages of a book. She stared at it, remembering the freedom she had felt in that bright art studio. The way Thomas had looked at her like she was a person worth knowing, not just a possession to be displayed. She wondered if he noticed when she stopped coming to class. She wondered if he thought about her at all. The unexpected alley help came from the most unlikely source. Robert Chen was Julian's business partner and closest friend. A quiet man in his 50s who rarely spoke at social gatherings. Natalia had met him several times but never really talked to him beyond polite greetings. So she was surprised when he appeared at the mansion one afternoon. Asking to speak with her privately, Victoria had gone to a salon appointment, and Julian was at the office. Robert sat across from Natalia in the garden, his expression serious but kind. "I know I have no right to interfere," Robert began carefully, "but I have known Julian since university. I watched him become the man he is today, and I am not proud of everything he has done. What he is doing to you is wrong, Natalia. You deserve better than this." Natalia felt tears spring to her eyes. Nobody had acknowledged her suffering in so long that hearing someone speak the truth out loud felt like a dam breaking inside her chest. "I do not know what to do," she whispered. "If I leave, he will destroy my family. He made that very clear." Robert nodded slowly. "Julian uses people's love for their families against them. It is one of his most effective business strategies. But I want you to know something. 6 months ago, Julian's company was investigated for financial fraud. Nothing came of it publicly because he paid the right people to make it go away. But I kept copies of everything. Documentation that could ruin him if it ever became public." Natalia stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need leverage," Robert said simply. "Because watching what he does to you reminds me too much of what he did to his first wife." "First wife?" Natalia felt the world tilt. "Julian was married before?" Robert's expression darkened. "Her name was Caroline. She was young, kind, full of life. Julian married her for similar reasons. He married you to improve his public image after a scandal. He treated her the same way he treats you. After 2 years, she tried to leave him. Julian threatened her family, just like he threatens yours. Caroline stayed, but the light went out of her eyes. 3 years into the marriage, she died in what was ruled an accidental fall down the mansion stairs." The blood drained from Natalia's face. "You think Julian killed her?" "I think Caroline gave up hope," Robert said quietly. "I think she saw no way out and stopped caring about living. The official report said she slipped. Maybe she did. Or maybe she just stopped trying to catch herself. Either way, Julian killed her spirit long before her body stopped breathing." Natalia felt sick. She thought about the nights she had stood at her bedroom window, looking down at the stone courtyard below, wondering if falling would hurt less than living. She had never seriously considered it, but she understood the darkness that must have consumed Caroline. "What do I do?" she asked. Robert pulled an envelope from his jacket. "These are copies of the documents. Keep them hidden. If Julian tries to hurt you or your family, use them. The threat of exposure is the only thing he truly fears. In this, he handed her a second envelope, is the contact information for my lawyer. She specializes in helping people leave difficult marriages. She is discreet and brilliant. When you are ready to leave, call her. Why are you helping me? Natalia asked, clutching the envelopes like lifelines. Because I should have helped Caroline, Robert said, his voice heavy with regret. I will not make that mistake twice. The truth comes to light that evening. Julian returned home early, something he rarely did. Natalia was in the library, trying to read, but mostly just staring at pages without seeing the words. Julian appeared in the doorway, and something about his expression made her stomach clench with fear. He was angry, but beneath the anger, she saw something else. Panic. Did Robert Chen come to see you today? Julian demanded. Natalia's mind raced. How did he know? Had someone told him? She forced her face to remain neutral. He stopped by briefly to drop off some papers for you. I told him you were at the office. Julian studied her face, searching for lies. What did he say to you? Nothing important. Just polite conversation about the weather. The lie came smoothly, and Natalia was surprised by her own ability to deceive. Julian continued watching her for a long moment, then seemed to accept her words. Robert is no longer my business partner. We dissolved our partnership this afternoon. If he contacts you again, you are to tell me immediately. Do you understand? Yes, Natalia said, her heart pounding. Something had happened between Julian and Robert, something that made Julian nervous. Over the next few days, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Natalia overheard heated phone calls that Julian tried to hide. She saw news reports about federal investigators looking into several tech companies for financial irregularities. She watched Julian's confidence begin to crack, revealing the fear beneath. Then, 3 weeks after Robert's visit, everything collapsed. Federal agents arrived at the mansion with search warrants. They seized computers, files, and documents while Julian stood helplessly, his face pale with rage and terror. The news broke within hours. Julian Hartwell was being investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering on a massive scale. His business empire was crumbling, and he was facing potential prison time. Victoria disappeared to her own estate, wanting no association with the scandal. The mansion staff began looking for new positions, sensing the end was near. And Natalia, for the first time in months, felt like she could breathe. The choice for freedom Julian found her in the garden 3 days after the raid. He looked like a different person, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. The man who had always been so controlled now looked desperate and broken. I need you to stand by me, he said without preamble. The lawyers say that having a supportive wife will help my case. Make me look more sympathetic. You need to do interviews, appear in court with me, tell everyone what a good husband I am. Natalia stared at him in disbelief. Even now, even facing ruin, he saw her only as a tool to be used. No, she said simply. Julian blinked as if he had misheard. What did you say? I said no. Natalia stood, feeling strength flowing through her that she had not felt in months. I will not lie for you. I will not pretend this marriage was anything other than a business arrangement that you treated with contempt. You used me. You used my love for my family to trap me in a cage made of money and threats. But your cage is crumbling now, and I am walking out. Your family, Julian said, his voice turning vicious. If you leave me now, I will make sure they lose everything. I still have enough influence to destroy them. Natalia pulled the envelope Robert had given her from her pocket. You mean the family you claim you saved? The family whose mortgage you paid off using money you stole from investors? The family you claimed as a tax deduction using fraudulent documents? Because I have copies of all of it, Julian. Every illegal transaction. Every forged signature. Everything you thought was hidden. Robert, he whispered. Robert gave me the truth, Natalia said, and insurance. If anything happens to me or my family, these documents go to the prosecutors. But if you leave us alone, I will keep them private. Your crimes are already catching up with you. You do not need me making it worse. For a long moment, they stood facing each other. The man who had once seemed so powerful now looked small and defeated. Finally, Julian nodded stiffly and walked away. Natalia never saw him again. New beginnings. 6 months later, Natalia stood in a small art gallery, surrounded by paintings she had created. Her work was displayed under her maiden name, Bennett, along with pieces from a dozen other artists. The opening night was modest compared to the lavish events she used to attend, but it felt more real than anything she'd experienced in the Hartwell mansion. Thomas stood beside her, his hand warm in hers. Their friendship had slowly transformed into something deeper. Something built on genuine respect and affection rather than contracts and obligations. He had been there through her divorce proceedings, through her testimony at Julian's trial. Through the long process of rebuilding her life from nothing, Julian was serving 15 years in federal prison. Victoria had disappeared from public life, her social standing destroyed along with her son's empire. The Hartwell mansion had been seized to pay restitution to Julian's victims, and Natalia had returned to her family's modest home, helping her father rebuild his business honestly this time. Without shortcuts or dangerous deals, she was poor again. Living in a tiny apartment and teaching art classes to pay rent. Her clothes came from thrift stores instead of designer boutiques. Her car was 15 years old and made strange noises when she turned corners. But when she woke up each morning, she felt joy. Real joy, not the hollow performance of happiness she had perfected as Mrs. Hartwell. "Your work is incredible," Thomas said, squeezing her hand gently. "I am so proud of you." Natalia looked at her paintings, each one telling part of her story. The bird breaking free from its cage. The woman removing a mask. The sunrise after a storm. They were not technically perfect, but they were honest. They were hers. "I am proud of me too," she said, meaning it with her whole heart. An older woman approached them, studying one of Natalia's paintings with interest. "This piece speaks to me," she said. "The way the colors move from darkness to light, it feels like a journey." "It is," Natalia replied. "It is about finding yourself after losing everything and discovering that everything you really needed was inside you all along." The woman smiled and placed a red dot on the placard, indicating a sale. It was Natalia's first sold piece, and tears filled her eyes. Not tears of sadness or desperation like she had cried so many times in the mansion, but tears of accomplishment and hope. That evening, after the gallery closed, Thomas and Natalia walked through the city streets. The neighborhood was ordinary, nothing special. But Natalia had never seen anything more beautiful. Street musicians played on corners. Families laughed in restaurants. Life happened all around them, messy and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Giving up all that money and security?" Natalia thought about the question seriously. She thought about her beautiful prison, about the designer clothes and expensive jewelry that had felt like weights dragging her down. She thought about the hollow conversations and the cold mansion and the man who had looked at her like she was. Furniture. Then she thought about her tiny apartment filled with paintings and thrift store furniture. She thought about her art students who could not afford expensive classes but showed up every week eager to learn. She thought about Sunday dinners with her family, cramped around a small table, laughing over simple food. She thought about Thomas, who loved her for who she was, not what she could do for his image. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single second." Thomas pulled her close, and they stood on the sidewalk as people rushed past them. He kissed her gently, a kiss full of promise and genuine affection. Nothing like the cold transaction she had experienced on her wedding night. "I love you, Natalia Bennett," he said. "Not for what you have or who you know, just for you." "I love you too," she replied, and meant it with her whole heart, as they continued walking hand in hand. Natalia realized that her nightmare had transformed into the best thing that ever happened to her. The wedding that shamed her had taught her the difference between price and value. The husband who rejected her had shown her what love was not, which helped her recognize real love when it finally arrived. She had lost everything and gained something far more valuable. Her freedom, her voice, her art, herself, and a love that did not trap her in a cage, but gave her wings to fly. The bird had finally broken free. and the sky stretched out endlessly before her, full of possibility and hope and second chances. Natalia Bennett was finally, truly home. The end.